This is the Reluctant Leader podcast, created because, through no fault of your own, you've become one. I'm your host, Mark Terrell, and I know how it feels when you're getting ground down by people issues, constantly firefighting and wondering how on earth you ended up here. In each episode, I invite a guest to discuss a topic and give you 3, sometimes more, top tips that will help you in your leadership role. They are experts in the field, and you'll find out why they do what they do and what took them down that path. For more resources to help you on your leadership journey, check out thereluctantleader.academy, where you'll find details of how to join the Reluctant Leader Success Path. So let's see who's in the hot seat this week. Today I'm talking to Garry Mumford. Gary is the founder of Insights Associates, a chartered certified accountant with long experience as a finance manager director, working with a vast number of owner-managed enterprises, charities and international corporates. Insights Associates was created to address a need that all growing and ambitious businesses have for good financial management. All too frequently, business leaders have the technical skills to do what their business does, but few possess the accompanying financial skills required to keep track of the vital money. His book, Business by Numbers, was published in 2017 to celebrate the 25th anniversary of his own business, and is a valuable educational tool for non-financial business owners to understand the principles of good financial management to ensure their success. I hope you enjoy this chat we had about business numbers, and I'll catch you all on the other side. Gary, welcome to the Reluctant Leader podcast.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here.
I've been looking forward to this, for many reasons. We're going to be talking about business numbers. Obviously, that's your forte, and that's what you've written a book about, and that's what you do on your day-to-day. But one of the things that we have in common, and those that have been listening to this podcast from day one, so the launch one, would notice that, or would have heard that I have a bit of a passion for trains. And that's one of the things that you talk about in your book, that you've got a passion for trains. Another reason why we've got something in common, and maybe we'll cover that as we talk about the subject. But before we get stuck into that topic, the question that I always ask the guests is, why do you do what you do? And what was that pivotal moment that took you down this path?
Right, well, that's an interesting one, really. I think, it all, for me, it started with a job that I took in the mid-'80s. That shows my age, doesn't it? I'm a trained accountant, and that's my background. The numbers is my background, but I've always had a real interest in what makes businesses work and what doesn't make them work, and that side of things. And I joined a company in the mid-'80s that was a supplied building materials, insulation and things like that. It was a family-owned business. It'd been running for a few years. It'd been incredibly successful, and it had 7 branches around the country. And I was the first professional, if you like, that was ever came into the business. Everybody else basically was very sales-based, and they were extremely good at what they did, clearly. My appointment as finance director was really pushed by their auditors and also by their bank, because basically they had no financial information whatsoever. It was an extreme example of applying by the seat of their pants, really. And the bank, I think, were getting very edgy, and understandably, with a £1.5 million overdraft. Those were the days, and the auditors were basically saying, you can't carry on like this. So my second interview with the directors was over the owner's snooker table in the back room of his house. So it was a very informal process. It was very weird, and obviously I was much younger then, and I came into this environment, and literally there was an accounts department of sorts, but all they were doing was paying the bills, collecting the cash, and not doing a great deal else. So I started from a clean sheet, and early board meetings were almost lessons in accounting and cash management and things which the guys that were, as I say, very successfully running this business had no real notion about. And this really, I think that was the spark of it for me. So I'm thinking, not every business, they're not unique. Every business must be like this to some extent. They were growing incredibly rapidly. And what had happened really is what was good enough when they started some years earlier was clearly not good enough anymore. And I think that was what started it for me, and made me think about where how all this fits. And then I actually ended up selling that business actually a couple of years later, and then moved into another role. And that idea was still in the back of my head. And then ultimately in 1992, I founded Insight Associates with a colleague, with really that whole objective in mind. How can we deliver good quality financial management, good quality information to smaller growing businesses when perhaps they don't normally have access to it? So that's what started it all, and it's been my passion ever since. Really, is to try and get engaged with businesses which are very ambitious, that are looking to go forward in a big way, and have an understanding that they don't understand, and they need to do something about it, but they're not really sure what. And that's basically the ethos of what Insight's about, and what it always has been. Obviously, the business model has evolved as it does over something that's been running for 27 years. But in essence, that's still what we do.
Yeah, and that story actually is quite common from what I see and what I do. In that, a lot of people start a business because they're passionate about something, or they're technically good at something, and then as they become successful, they still carry on doing things the same way, and obviously that leads to some problems. And obviously we'll expand on that. And I think one of the things that I've learned just recently, actually, one of my clients was looking to expand and going to work with bigger businesses, and it seemed like the natural thing to do. But actually, what they realised was that if they go down that path, that's a different world, and they would need to have a massive injection of cash, because they would be giving a lot of their product away and having to wait 3 months for the payment and all those sort of things. And those things were not really considered. And actually they backtracked from there. So I'm sure those sort of things are quite common for
very common, yes.
Yeah. So it's about having a plan. And that's from your book, Business Numbers. That's the message I get is the number one thing is to have a vision and put a plan in place. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we find, the work we're doing now, and my experience over the years, is that, and as I mentioned to you, a while back, I have a passion for Michael Gerber's E-Myth, which I believe should be a book that is issued by Companies House when people incorporate companies. Mm-hmm. I think it's such an essential reading for anybody that's looking to build a business. And in essence, it's Gerber's model that we build on. And basically what he says, which I think is so true in my experience, is that businesses are generally created by people that have the technical skills to do what the business does. And you look around you, and in fact, I did it. I mean, I created a business that does what I do, and everybody does this. And what happens is that they might be very good at that technical skill, and in fact, they probably are, which is why they felt that they could get on and do it for themselves. But running a business that does that is a completely different game, because then you're moving into all the other disciplines that are needed to run a successful business, which are well beyond that technical skill set. And as Gerber puts it, you move from out of a steady job into working for a complete lunatic, which is actually true. You're your own lunatic, because you're trying to do all these things, and actually you've not got the skill set to do them. And my experience is that the ones that succeed in the long term are the ones that understand that and realize that, and surround themselves with all the skills that they need, whatever they are, not necessarily only financial, but you've got HR skills, distribution skills, manufacturing skills, so it goes on, or whatever the business is doing. They surround themselves with a team of people with competencies in all those skills, and basically what they do is they lead. And have the passion to lead, because they obviously know what about. They don't revert to type, which is end up doing what they do, which is often what causes failure. And again, having worked in the arena of businesses which are distressed and having difficulties, you often find that a lot of the reasons for that is because the people that are running them are too arrogant to realise they need help. And no one can do it on their own. No one can make this work without building a team around them. and having people to mentor them and help them. And those are the successful businesses and the successful people. So, from the financial side, it becomes pretty obvious that what you put in place when you start your business, when it's small and it's running out of the back bedroom or even small premises, is certainly not going to be what you're going to need when you grow up and get bigger, and it will change dramatically. And I think the successful businesses have got to be really open to the fact that things have got to be done very differently.
Yeah. And I mentioned our mutual love of trains.
Yes.
And you've also, in your book, you managed to reference that and how that, the train, what should we call analogy, can be thought of within the book. Do you want to just explain to our listeners about how you've done that?
Where the training thing comes from? Well,
yes,
basically, I mean, I've always had a real interest in steam railways, heritage railways. I have for some 15, 16 years been the Chief Financial Officer of the Tallaght Railway in Wales, which is actually where I'm speaking to you from now. Actually, I'm over there at the moment, which was the first railway in the world to be preserved by volunteers back in 1950. And that's always been a passion of mine. And as a result of that and the connections I have in that area, I have in the last couple of years also been finance director of the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which has been featured on television quite a lot over the last couple of years. And that's the biggest one by virtue of size. So very interesting. I find the whole area very interesting. But what's curious again is that whilst we're trying to preserve heritage and we're looking to keep something from the past, there is a need to do things differently in the background to make them work and to respond to modern needs, modern technology, the needs of the public, which is obviously the visitors, is what keeps it all going. So they're an interesting animal, and I find it really quite fascinating to be able to use my skill set in that area, which obviously I'm passionate about, but at the same time get the balance right between running a Victorian railway and actually in the background basically what's going on is exceptionally modern and up to date and needs to cater for all the stuff that's happening. So they need to evolve, even though on the face of it they look the same. What's going on in the background is very, very different.
Yeah. I think in the book you mentioned about when the railways sort of came to being, it was up to the important thing that happened was that they were able to come up with some sort of standardizations so that we can actually travel across the country and not really think about it. Whereas if they'd done it differently, if every region had done it differently, then we'd be literally having to stop and change trains because they're on different tracks or whatever. And that's, if we talk about that in a business sense, that's really important that you have a future vision that is, ultimately we want to get something that's actually scalable and will be useful in the future.
Yeah, and the railway history through the early Victorian periods into the early 1800s was very much driven by a very small number of visionaries, people who saw the need for change, and saw that the only way you were really going to make a difference, like you say, is standardise things and keep things on a level so that all, in fact, the gauge of UK railways is now the standard gauge throughout the world because we went much further than the UK and we created that. And also the other thing that was really interesting with the railways is that it standardised time. Up until the coming of the railways, time was different in different parts of the UK. So, you could have had a situation with a train leaving London and arriving somewhere else in the UK and the time was different. Can you imagine trying to run like that now? But it is. Is that sort of having a vision? And I think that's the other thing which I think is quite key with someone who's growing a business and taking things forward is having some idea of what their journey looks like and where they're going. I mean, you wouldn't leave your house in the morning to go to your office or your factory or whatever without having a very clear idea of where you were going, how you were going to get there, and actually, possibly quite importantly, how you were going to feel when you arrived. Yet people seem to create businesses with no idea about why they're doing it, other than just to do it. And unless you've got some sort of idea of where you're going, how do you know you've ever got there? It's sort of shades of the Cheshire Cat and Alice in Wonderland. Any way will do. And it's a weird situation, but you do see it so often with people that haven't really thought about why they're doing it, what the purpose is, and what their journey might look like. And it will change. Inevitably it does. Businesses have to evolve a lot, and they learn, and new opportunities come along, and things change as a business develops. So that journey might look different, and that destination might even change. That's not wrong. That's just part of the process of knowing why you're going somewhere.
Yeah, and I'm sure your business has evolved with different things. We talked
massively.
before, and I'm sure you see opportunities that you want to do something maybe slightly differently or something, and it's being open to those things as well, isn't it? As going down it's not. I think a lot of people, when we say, well, we set a vision and goals and all that sort of stuff, it's not about just setting them and having to stick to them. If something comes along and we need to pivot or change, then that we should be able to do that, shouldn't we?
Well, you should at the very least consider it and be open to that possibility and that prospect. I mean, my own business has evolved massively in its time. And one of the things we learned quite early on was that, initially, myself and my original business partner, we had this vision that we could almost helicopter into businesses with our experience and sort of play the finance director, financial controller type role and help give them some good information about where they were and understand their businesses better and improve their financial side. And what we quickly discovered was that it's not as simple as that, because you can't perform that role unless the basics are in place and the basic systems and processes are solid and they're built on good foundations and they're delivering reliable information. And from that, over a period of time, a good few years, in fact, we evolved into what principally we do now, which is to deliver an outsourced finance department where we effectively are the entire finance and accounting function for a growing business, right from all the day-to-day bookkeeping, accounting, transactional stuff, right the way up to playing the FD role. And it was evolving that model, which we see as a pyramid. And again, about that concept in the book. It's evolving that pyramid model, which was key to what we do now, and actually being able to deliver something that was replicatable and worked and that other people could get involved in. And that's how the business evolved, really, through the development of that idea and that model. But and I had no idea that was what it was when we started out. And in fact, not even for the first few years did we have any idea that's what it was like. And that's the journey that businesses tend to go through. But because of that, the one thing that most businesses, business owners and the creators and leaders fail to pay enough attention to, and I'm bound to say this, aren't I, is the financial side. Because that gets left behind, and you often see a scenario where businesses are a few years old and they've got Madge the bookkeeper who started on the day they started out, still sitting in the corner, and no one really understands what she does and why she's there, but they know they've got to have her. And they've got no information, they've got no up-to-date understanding of where they are. They can't make quality decisions about where they are because they don't understand sufficiently about it. It's all done on the seat of the pants. And that's fine when you're small and maybe a couple of people, but it certainly doesn't work when you're employing a number of people and you've reached a reasonable size. Yet it's not been given any attention and it just gets left behind. And the issue you then got is that a large business, a big corporate, whatever, has got the access to all those skills and the ability to build a big finance team because it can afford to do that. Where does a business go when it's in that middle ground, when it's outgrown one person, one accounts person or bookkeeper or whatever, yet it's still not big enough to be able to afford to have the big corporate finance function, but it needs those skills. And that's really what our model is about. What we like to look at as an adolescence period that's in the middle. When they're growing up and changing, but it's a mindset of the people that are running the business that's key there. They've got to be open to that, know that if they want to go there, they've got to change their whole way of dealing with things. And I guess with all this, technology has had a big effect on the way that you shaped your business. I know now I see things that I wish I had when I was running my retail business, such as the cloud accounting software, which obviously is always up to date and all those sort of things. But technology, I'm guessing you're using more and more in your business in what you've described. I'm sure that's really important, isn't it? Yeah, it is very important, and it's obviously there's a degree of expectation with it, but also what you can achieve now it was not even dreamt of a few years ago. The fact you've got accessibility, the fact that you can deliver information in different ways, the fact that location is no longer an issue. Because one thing we've been on a major exercise to do over the last couple of years at Insight is to reduce paper. And actually, we've now got more empty lever arch files and we've got full ones. We have been so successful in eliminating paper. We've still got some way to go. There's still certain processes and things that do generate too much. But even when we generate the paper, we then scan it and file it electronically rather than filing it on paper, which reduces the workload trend, makes things much more accessible. But also, like you say, that the fact that things are hosted in the cloud, that makes them readily accessible. So it's easy for us to work remotely from the business, deliver information, and make that information readily accessible by the business when it needs it. It's much easier to integrate what we're doing with processes and systems within the business than it used to be. So the fact that everything's so open and accessible is massive. And I'm a great one for technology. I love it, and my constant striving is to find a way of doing it with technology rather than doing it with people. Which enables you to develop and replicate and build much more readily sometimes than trying to find the skilled people. It's not always easy to find the right people. If you get a system that works, then replicating it and delivering it elsewhere is relatively easy.
Yeah. And it goes back to the principle of businesses, are run by great systems, and then those systems are run by great people.
Yes, that's right. Well, again, it's a Gerberism, isn't it? I mean, every small business in the world is people dependent, and every big business in the world is systems dependent. And systems are run by the people, so therefore you're not reliant on key individuals. And that's the only way you can build value in a business. You won't be able to build value in a business if it's reliant on key people, because someone will not want to buy a business where the people could walk out the door.
Yeah. So that's a great way you've led into the people side of things. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about leadership, is that's the biggest headache and where they struggle. And you do some work around people, don't you? I know you use some tools.
I've always been fascinated by how people behave and how they interact in the workplace. Having seen it in different businesses, you go in and you see that there's animosity and there's difficult relationships, and you think, well, why has this happened? And before Insight, in fact, I got very involved with the Thomas International Personal Profile Analysis, PPA, which is one of these DISC systems that people may have come across, which is very good at looking at people's profiles and how they behave and what their preferences are. But more recently, along with yourself, I've got very involved with motivational maps, which are also extremely interesting, looking at what switches people on, what gets them out of bed in the morning, and how well they're getting that, which I find the two things actually interact really well. So we use them quite a lot in work we do with when we're specifically working with businesses to develop them. It's really interesting to profile the key people in the team, and then get them to see each other's profiles and see how where the issues might be, or why things work and why things don't work, and where there might even be gaps in what they need. And the great thing, I think, is you probably found with these sort of tools, is that people very, very rarely, in my experience, dispute the findings of their own profile. Yeah, there they go. Yes, that's me. Then when you put everybody up next to each other on the board, when they've all agreed with their own, they can't disagree then that there's anything wrong with it. And then it really opens their eyes to, that's why I don't get on with that person. Or that's why that doesn't work very well. Or that's why that department isn't delivering, because they're all badly motivated. Why is that? What can you do about that? And it can be a real eye opener. But at the end of the day, we've said, great systems businesses are systems dependent. It's, you still need good motivated people in your business, and every business has a need for good people that understand what they're doing and are well motivated to do it. So it's really quite interesting work.
Yeah, yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. It's when you actually put people, allow them to compare themselves with others, and they can't really question it. And then what comes out of that conversation is gold dust. It's absolute gold dust. And I just encourage all my clients to get there as soon as possible, because once they open up that conversation, it can really lead to massive changes.
You see massive shifts, and I think the thing, and again, particularly with motivational maps, is that that's a very sort of very fluffy thing, motivation, and people rarely understand what it is that motivates them. They just know whether they are motivated or they're not motivated. And when you can put it into some sort of factual form, in some sort of context, and as that system does, then it becomes incredibly powerful. Can really get people to understand what they need, or the people that are managing them, how they might adapt what they're doing to make things work better. And yes, I've seen some incredible things come from that, and it's always been very fascinating.
And it fits in with the sort of the new way of working, and that you start from the bottom and work up rather than the other way down. That sort of, rather than command and control, it's actually what do the shop floor staff really want? What can we give them, and work up from there. And I think that's such a great, healthy, modern way to work, and that's why.
Absolutely.
I think it's a way that businesses need to be looking at. So we've gone off the sort of business number thing, because I think people are really important, obviously, to all this. One of the things that I picked up in the book, and it really came back to me because it was something that was key in our business, and it really affected us in a big way, was you talk about the danger of direct debits. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit, just a little bit of story about this. So back in the day, we were running a retail business, and we took a big step. We changed from one symbol group, which is like a buying group, to another. And with that change, there's things that they work slightly differently. And one of the things that we had to do was we had to get a new supplier for our wines and spirits, because that wasn't centrally distributed. So we were given a supplier that was recommended. And you go through the process and you tick the boxes and fill in all these forms. And we started trading with them. And we were told in a conversation that we paid 4 weeks after delivery. And you didn't really think any more about that. It was so we'd signed a direct debit, and that was what we expected to happen. What actually happened was that they put us on a monthly direct debit, what that meant was that we would pay for the previous month in one go, rather than 4 weeks after each one. So So we haven't touched on cash flow here, but you can see the cash flow implications straight away, can't you? I'm sure you will, because of what's happened. So all of a sudden, one day, we woke up to our bank account being overdrawn. I'm not expecting it, because what happened the day before was this massive DD for, you can imagine we were selling a lot of booze and alcohol in those times. And that was a massive, I think it was about £40,000. We had not got that money in our bank account. Or I think we just about had that enough. So that actually went through. But what happened the next day, our main supplier, our symbol group supplier, was due, and that direct debit failed. But it was basically because, obviously, there was a system error there, but direct debits really causes a big problem in that, something obviously didn't work correctly, but those are sort of things that can happen when, direct debits, they basically got access to your money.
They've got their hand in your bank account. Absolutely, they have. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know whether you want to expand a bit more on that.
Well, I'm not advocating they're bad things. As you said, the words were the danger of direct debits.
Yes, that's right.
Like everything else, it's about managing things and understanding them. And whilst your example is interesting, where there was perhaps a misunderstanding in terms of how the direct debit would be used, what we find often is that there's direct debits being paid out of a business bank account that no one's aware of, where they subscribed to something years ago, or some other payment is going out on a regular basis. And the great thing about direct debits from that point of view is that if you're the one who is originating that direct debit and asking for that money, you're going to get your money until someone comes along and says no. And that is what often happens. And people sign direct debit forms, and in fact, actually, in this day and age, it's not even necessary to sign one. We've seen instances of people quite innocently agreeing to a direct debit when they've entered into some deal or contract, but they're not authorised bank mandate signatories, and but they still go through, and therefore money's literally dripping out the bottom of your bank account without you really being aware of it, and you're probably paying for things you don't need, paying for things in a way that you don't want to pay for them. You've given an awful lot of control to your supplier or whoever it is. My point really with them is that they need to be managed. And the best way of managing cash flow generally, and certainly understanding direct debits, is to make sure you understand on a day-by-day basis exactly what's going out of your bank account and why it's going out. And again, I talk about that a lot in the book in terms of that process of managing cash flow, because that's often completely missing in the businesses that we start to work with. But also, just on a periodic basis, make a diary note or whatever system you use to keep your lists and action points. And every 3 months or so, just you can do it with most online banking systems now. Run off a list of all the direct debits that are set up on your bank account, and go through them and understand why they're there, and make sure that you're happy that they should be there. And you'll be surprised. To put money on it, there'll be one or two there at least that shouldn't be there, and they're dripping money out, or they're ones of things that you cancelled years ago, but the direct debit itself never got cancelled, which means that if that person or supplier, for any reason, came along, that they get your money. The backstop always is, of course, there is a direct debit guarantee. So if you've got a dispute for the amount that's come out of your bank account, you have got the ability to go back to your bank, and they will reverse it immediately without question. But then you might have issues with whoever it was that took the money. So
I was just going to say that it's really important that, especially as businesses are growing, those sort of small little things get overlooked. And then when you actually look back on it, you've actually probably shelled out an awful lot of money that you needn't have done so. And
the wastage that goes out of every business is quite staggering at times. And and even my business, every now and again you go through it, and some of my team sometimes get, well, what are you faffing about for 40 quid for? Well, it all adds up. And therefore we say, well, do we need this? Why are we buying this? What we getting for this? And direct debits are that hidden way of that money disappearing, which is great. And also the other one is, of course, if you've got company credit cards, it's possible to set up a recurring charge on your credit card, so they can go out your credit card every month or every quarter or whatever as well. So they also need looking at. But that was more my point with the direct debit thing. But what you said is quite interesting as well. I've seen it with suppliers understandably saying you must pay by direct debit, because from their point of view it's a great thing to have, but there's not really a clear understanding of exactly when they're going to take and what they're going to take, and therefore it becomes impossible for you to plan what your cash flow, because you don't know what's going to happen next.
I mean, it was a big lesson at the time. It caused us a big headache.
I bet it did. And you lose credibility over it with the people that actually matter to you.
Well, absolutely. Because I think the Simba group we joined, I think the MD, I think, only had 2 conversations with him in the time that we were members, and one of them was that time when he was basically knocking on the door saying, "Why haven't you paid us?" So yes, it was very, very embarrassing, and obviously we put in systems to make sure that didn't happen again. But there we go. We live and learn.
That's interesting.
Sadly, our time is running out, Gary, and what it's been really interesting and for me a little bit a look back on what I used to be more involved with on the day-to-day, and it's all relevant and really interesting, and that's why your book is a must-read for anybody that's not particularly interested, and you talk about that, and most people aren't particularly interested in this stuff. Actually, if you read the book, you get the overview of lots of things that you probably not have thought about before, and then what that gives you is an opportunity then to think about, well, how can I actually get somebody else maybe to take care of this for me?
You get the help you need. And we deliberately formatted the book and presented it in a way that makes it easy to dip in and out of. So it's not, it's not a heavy read. No, it's quite light-hearted and easy to get through, because most people, I think, will get quite frightened of business books and think they're going to be a droll and difficult to get through, and hopefully that isn't. So
For my summary of the book would be it's just the information you really need to know. I'm sure there's lots of detail that you've left out that it's just, it is relevant, but not maybe from someone that's maybe in a leadership position. From a leadership perspective, it's all the things you need to know, which you can then obviously take some action around. And that's what I liked about the book.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, we're running out of time. And what I always leave my listeners or our listeners with is some top tips. 3 I asked for. Some want to give me more, but 3. Have you got 3 tips for us?
Yeah,
Gary?
I've got 3 things. I mean, obviously covering some of the ground that we've talked about. But I think, for me, the 3 things which probably are key if you're running or you have ambitions to run a growing business that's going to move forward quite rapidly. And certainly the first one of those is don't ignore your numbers. It's really critical. And a lot of people ignore them because they're frightened of them. They don't understand them. They have a fear of them. If that is you, get help. Get someone working alongside you who can really help you understand those numbers and make sure they're good numbers. It will make your decision-making process so much easier. The second one is the old cliche, which is cash really is king. Everybody talks about cash being king, but that is a reality. No business, to put it the other way, is every business that fails through a lack of cash. In the same way as that every human being that dies because their heart stops beating. It's the same issue. Cash is always in there, and that is what will kill you if you don't get it right. You might be very profitable, but if you've not got the cash right, it can still kill you. So cash really is king. Make sure you understand it and control it. And the third one I've got is about embracing change, which obviously we've talked about. Don't be frightened of it. Accept that what you've done in the past isn't what's going to serve you well for the future, and be prepared to be open to the idea of doing things differently.
Brilliant stuff. Excellent. Well, I feel a bit guilty that I've kept you from your big grown-up train set. So I'll let you get away and go and play with that. And thank you again.
No, thank you, Mark. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out thereluctantleader.academy. And if you get a chance, please leave a review on whichever platform you have been listening. And also share the love by sharing the episode with someone who would benefit. Leadership is a choice. If you have the right mindset, know the process to follow, and the key skills to use at each point in the process, you have everything you need to leave a lasting legacy. Don't forget to put into action anything that has struck a chord in this episode. And until next time, be the best you can be.